One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy krausen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brewlosophy podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. Whether you're entering beer into a homebrew competition or distributing product on the commercial market, flavor stability has long been a challenge faced by brewers. And when it comes to beer staling, the most commonly cited culprit is oxidation, and typical solutions to reducing oxygen ingress usually involve cumbersome and often expensive machines. However, a product hit the scene recently that offers a chemical option for reducing the risk of oxidation. You're listening to the Brewlosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me to talk about BrewTan B is contributor Matt Del Fiacco.
So like you mentioned, obviously staling is a major concern for a lot of brewers and especially professional brewers where, your product may be sitting on the shelf for months at a time and it's, in a jewel and everyone's been handling it and it's like room temperature and all that stuff. As there's more, I guess, fuel, quote unquote, right? As there's more potential for oxidation, that's more of a risk. So the use of BrewTan B, which is, as we'll talk about, a gallic acid, is used to try to combat that problem.
Yeah. It's, I've become a huge believer in the ill effects oxygen can have on beer. And while I've taken steps to ensure as little comes into contact with my beer as possible, from, the Brewloon luck, as we so aptly call it, we talked about it in a recent episode on cold side oxidation, purging kegs with CO2 and all of that. I do think that it's very important. And what we've seen through some of our experiments seems to support this idea that reducing oxygen contact with the beer on the cold side or once fermentation has occurred really can extend the shelf life, even though as homebrewers, we don't have to worry too much about that, but it can keep the beer tasting good longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely something that we have to pay special concern to as homebrewers because the vector for oxidation is so much larger.
Right.
And, we a lot of practices are around, hey, just rack into this bottling bucket and you're going to be fine. And honestly, you are fine. I've had some good beers from that kind of a process. Totally good. But, those beers, if you want to store them 4 or 5 months down the line, or if you have a really hoppy beer where there is more of that potential for oxidation due to some of the lipid and just the general content that is added by the hops, we know that that's such a sensitive character. So it's just a way for us to try to alleviate some of the problems that are introduced by our scale.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, besides, even with all of the methods that I've employed over the last few years to reduce oxidation, one I haven't tried yet is BrewTan B. So I'm excited to learn about this from you today, Matt. Hey, listen, we've got some cool stuff coming up that we want to let you all know about. First off, Hop Harvest in Yakima, Washington. We finally got our plans set. We are going to be up in Yakima. By we, I'm referring to contributor Brian Hall and I. We're going to be up there from September 20th to 23rd, and we'd love to meet up with anyone who might be around town at that time. We ended up being really busy last year, and we're unable to make it down to Sunnyside to hang out with our friends from Varietal Beer Company, which I talked a ton about even on the show. So that's definitely on the list for this year. And of course, we're going to be stopping into Wandering Hop as well. Nathan and crew are killing it at that brewery. Unfortunately, we won't be in town for the Fresh Hop Party put on by Yakima Valley Hops, but I strongly encourage anyone who is able to make it up there for the first, I believe it's the first weekend in October. You got to go to the Fresh Hop Party. It's such a freaking blast. Great beer, great music. All around good time. The reason we're not going to be attending the Fresh Hop Party is because I'm going to be in Dublin, Ireland, presenting at their annual BrewCon, along with the great Ron Pattinson from the Shut Up About Barclay Perkins blog. I've never been to Ireland, so I'm really looking forward to hanging out with some local brewers over there, drinking some beers. I'm sure there's going to be one commercial beer that I'll be drinking a lot of while I'm over there.
I am wildly jealous of this experience.
I'm jealous of future.
I did
Marshall
not
as
know
well.
you were doing this before you started this podcast, and I'm very, very jealous right now.
Yeah, I understand why, and it's. I think it's going to be a good time. If you want to learn more about going to BrewCon or registering, you can do that at nationalhomebrewclub.ie. Now, one thing that we were just talking about, Matt and Jake, we're not totally set on whether or not this is going to happen, but BYO Bootcamp 2020 or 2020, whatever we're going to call that, is coming up, and we've been kind of toying around with the idea of having Jake and Matt maybe put on a couple courses for that one as well. Talking with Brad about that, so that'll be coming up in the future. We'll be sure to announce it when we get plans for that set. Hey, huge shout out to all of our 850 plus patrons. We honestly would not be here if it weren't for your support. If you like what we're up to and you want to help us to keep doing it, consider becoming a patron yourself by visiting patreon.com/brewlosophy, where for a small monthly pledge you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world, folks like Michael Tonsmeyer, John Palmer, Gordon Strong, Vinny Chilurzo, John Kimmich, so many more. All past sessions are available on our private Facebook page, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. I was just talking with Scott Janish, who actually did the Q&A a while back, and I want to have him back on because he just released that IPA book. I don't know if there's anybody out there who's done more digging into hop research than Scott. So he's agreed to do it. So that'll probably be coming up in the next couple of months. You can learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support. When shopping online, your shopping experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little love for the referral. All right, feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who not only make gorgeous stainless brewing rigs like the turnkey BH15 pilot system, but offer fully customizable options and a whole host of unique purpose-built products as well. If you've been looking to upgrade your brewery, build out an electric setup, or pick up some quality stainless parts, give brewershardware.com a look. They've got it all. And when you mention that you heard about them on the Brewlosophy podcast, they'll throw in a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. Adam L. had some feedback on a response we gave to a Brew&A question about using an Instapot for pressure canning wort. He says that low-acid food, pH of 4.6 and above, needs to be canned at 10 to 15 psi and 240 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 116 to 121 degrees Celsius for 20 to 100 minutes. There's been no testing to verify that these electric pressure cookers can achieve those temps and pressure. This leaves the danger of botulism in the canned wort. The toxin is heat stable and will be in the finished beer.
Yeah, excellent correction. And I think a part of what we're doing is we're happy to be wrong, I guess.
Yes.
When, you know what I mean?
Especially when it has to do with hurting somebody potentially.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So in this instance, 100%, that is fantastic. I'm really glad that you sent us that, and I'm really glad that we get to kind of do this follow-up on it, just to sort of say, if this is unsafe, now obviously someone could come back and say botulism is so rare and blah, 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 but really, do you want to risk it?
Exactly. That's where I'm at as well. Yeah, I appreciate the feedback, Adam. When we were, I recall after responding to that question in my head thinking, God, we could be way off on this. And I think we were. I will fall on our swords on this one.
Yes.
If I don't even have an Instapot, I barely even know what the things are. I just thought they were miniature versions of pressure cookers. So, if you can't achieve these things to keep yourself safe, I'd recommend skipping canning wort using an Instapot. That, at least, speculatively looking at it until somebody gets some testing done. Now, yeah, like you said, Matt, botulism is a very rare and unlikely to occur in canned wort, but again, I'm a risk. I take risks, but not when it comes to things that could potentially kill me like that. So
no, definitely not. Don't get sick. If you guys want to can your wort, get a pressure cooker. Because we know it works. So just go for that.
Yeah, go for that. I agree. All right. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320 or risk saying something on social media. We might pick it up there as well. Barley wine isn't a style I make or drink very often, but that's not to say I don't like it. In fact, I rather enjoy sipping a well-made version of this humongous style. Well, listener Paul Shanks sent me an American barley wine that he made, about which he said, now this is pretty long. He gave some details on this. He said, I started planning on brewing a barley wine almost a year ago. I did a lot of research on the style and wanted to give it a wood and bourbon character. Back in March of 2018, I took 2 ounces of medium oak chips and placed them in a mason jar with bourbon so they were completely submerged. I also acquired 1 pound of NYS Chinook hops. I think that's New York State. He's from Canandaigua, New York. Whole cone, 2010 lot year, unopened bag, stored in freezer for years, but the alpha acid was unknown. So these are some pretty old hops. From a local brewery that closed, and our homebrew club was able to obtain a lot of grains and hop. A friend of mine in the homebrew club also got a pound of the same Chinook hops and opened them up to brew with and said they still smelled great. So I decided to use the whole pound later in the boil, flame out, whirlpool, and dry hops for more flavor and aroma since I didn't know the original alpha acid percent. I used pellet Chinook hops to calculate the IBU I wanted for the bittering charge. I finally dialed in the recipe and found a day to brew, which was on October 19th of 2018, added the dry hops on December 18th of 2018, and added the oak chips only to the keg using a mesh cylinder and racked the beer into the keg on January 5th, 2019. The beer was then bottled off the keg on January 28th, 2019. Some of the homebrew club members mentioned it may be more of an American strong ale than an American barley wine. I guess he shared this beer with Phil, our contributor Phil Rusher, and Phil agreed that it may fit the American strong ale category better than it does barley wine. Some stats, it comes in at a whopping 11.1% ABV. That's 1107 OG down to an FG of 1024. Of course I was going to serve this to my friends.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
I'm a professional, short and stout. It's very dark, caramelly in texture and color.
Caramelly. Let's see.
Oh, you like the smell?
Means nothing. I know. Oh my God.
You don't like it?
No. Please taste.
I want to believe like he does. Oh, it smells yummy.
It smells like a barley wine.
It smells like when your grandfather would give you Werther's Original out of his pocket.
Wait till you taste. It smells like a barley wine.
No. You think, okay, so we don't like barley wines except for Devil's. God, that was good. So every time we don't like something, we think it's a barley wine.
I don't know if I can finish
It's not a fucking barley wine, guy. You don't even know what barley is.
You're right.
Or wine. I'm going to take
Taste
a sip.
up.
You ready for a professional roll in?
Yes, I am.
Me too. Marshall, come drink this. I like it.
Really?
And not because you don't like it.
Oh God.
I like it for what it is. What it is some kind of a
it's not
fancy style. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I need you to come with me. Grab your beer and let's take a taste together.
I'll take another taste.
I taste butterscotch.
I'm with you with the butterscotch.
I agree with you. It's something.
It's just not me.
It's something in the. You know when they redo someone's song and they're like in the style of. This is in the style of barley wine. Let's do that. That way, if it's not a barley wine, it'll look like fools. Dude, it's high in content. 11.6%.
God, I can still taste it. It's awful, and I'm not even drinking it.
We're gonna drink this down, and then at the end of it, we're gonna make an accurate assessment after we've drank it. Let's do it. You first.
I can't. I don't mean it in a mean way. It's
I
just
think
horrible
it's
for me.
I think it's. Oh God. We shouldn't do this. I think it's a barley wine. I think it. You said that first, but I wanted to say no because we know better than to say things and made it look like fools. I think it's a barley wine. I think it's got a little bit of butterscotch and urine in it, and I don't like it. I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't like it. I think it's a barley wine.
I'm going 0 for me.
135%. It's a barley wine. Oh God, we're going to be made to look like fools. Also, I hate it, but not because it's not good, but because I don't like barley wines, and you don't like them either, dude.
It's just not for me.
It's just not for us.
Okay, so it doesn't surprise me that the guys weren't big fans of this beer. They very rarely like bigger beers, particularly ones that have more character, if that makes any sense. This one, I thought it was a pretty good example of a barley wine. I thought it would fit barley wine style fairly well. It did have a sharpness to it, which I can't help but wonder if that sharpness didn't come from the older hops, perhaps that beta acid bitterness that I've picked up when I use older hops. But it was a perfectly drinkable barley wine, in my opinion. Matt, I know you're a big fan of bigger beers like this. What do you think of the recipe and the details that he shared with us?
No, I think it looks great. Like I mean, yeah, I love barley wine. And honestly, like it's one of those things where it's interestingly a tie-in that we're gonna talk about today, which is just like the oxidation of things like isoalpha acids, as those things are, like trans isomers are less stable, right? So like as those things are oxidized, like you can actually get like a more perceptible, harsher character, and a harsher bitterness. So that might be part of it, just based on the fact that if they felt it was like more of an American strong ale, and then more of it was getting like a little harsher, But overall, like it's I don't want to say forgiving style necessarily, but there's just so much room for interpretation.
Sure.
So it sounds great to me, man. I wish I could have tried it. I love a good barley wine.
Yeah, and again, I'm not sitting here saying that fawning over it but it was a good beer. It was a good beer. It didn't surprise me that Jersey and Tim weren't huge fans of it.
Yeah.
I do believe also that was the last review of the night, and so they weren't totally standing up straight, if you know what I mean. But anyways, I do appreciate you sending in the beer, Paul. If you have a beer or any other fermented beverage that you'd like Jersey and Tim to review, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and I'll get you all set up. All right, time for a quick break. We'll BrewTan be right back.
You should be ashamed. That was horrible.
So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all-grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or Glycol Chiller at grainfather.com. Once again, that's grainfather.com.
Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Oxidation is real and has an undeniable impact on the aroma and flavor stability of beer. Hence the reason commercial brewers invest so much time and money in ensuring the lowest level of oxygen contact with their beer as possible. Similarly, homebrewers have developed some arguably complicated methods to reduce oxidation, though with BrewTan B, this may not be necessary. Now, as someone who has absolutely zero experience with this product, Matt, I'm hoping you can educate me a bit about this stuff.
I will do my best. So let's just start with what BrewTan B is. And you know, it was so BrewTan B, previously Tanal B, is a tannic acid fining agent produced by Ajinomoto Food Solutions. And they're here in North America. So like when we talk about fining agents, we're typically talking about things like Irish moss, like Werflock tablets, and the goal of those is typically clarity.
Right.
And the way those fining agents work is by having positively charged molecules, and then those large molecules will attract smaller negatively charged compounds in the beer, and they get heavy and they can settle out of solution.
Right.
And you can leave it behind in the boil kettle, and then you ultimately have like a clearer wort and what we hope is a clearer beer. And then, or in the fermenter, like if you use like a gelatin, kind of the same function. It collects all that stuff, drops to the bottom.
Right. The whole idea is to encourage the precipitation of a particulate matter in the liquid, essentially.
Yep, that's it. Nailed it. So, but BrewTan B is a little bit different in the sense that it's a tannic acid that can be used both in the mash and the boil, and it's a gallotannin. So that's a class of tannin, and the use of gallotannins in brewing is fairly well researched. Like there's quite a bit of history to it, right? Like BrewTan B, we've typically talked about more recently, I think in recent years, like the past couple.
Yeah.
It's really making a swing, and it wasn't available in America for quite a bit. But the use of gallotannins is definitely somewhat well researched, and there's actually an excellent article that I highly recommend to people called "The Evaluation of the Addition of Gallotannins to the Brewing Liquor for the Improvement of the Flavor Stability of Beer," which is a mouthful of a title, but it's a pretty accurate summary of what the article's going for. And that's in the Masters of Brewers Association of America Communicator Technical Quarterly. So it's a great. If you guys aren't familiar with the Master Brewers work, it's fantastic.
It's fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, it's really really good. Their podcast as well, so highly recommend. But basically, like what they found in that series of studies was that the gallotannins are pretty effective at binding aldehydes and just that whole coagulation process of thiol-containing proteins. So basically, like as the degradation of amino acids, the oxidation of lipids, and like we mentioned previously for the barley wine, like the oxidation of isoalpha acids, gallotannins seem to be able to promote flavor stability. They seem to be able to make sure or remove some of those compounds that are going to provide fuel for oxidation or for noticeable oxidation.
So, okay, that's an interesting, because I honestly did not realize that BrewTan B was considered a fining agent. Is that what you're saying, that it basically falls into the class of a fining agent?
I mean, so technically speaking, I don't know that I would call it a fining agent, because when we talk about fining agents, we talk primarily about the clarity agents themselves. Right. But it is just another compound that we are adding to beer, similar to the way that we would add fining agents. So it's kind of like just something to think about along those lines.
Yeah.
But it is not. I probably wouldn't consider it a fining agent.
Okay.
Because the primary goal of BrewTan B is not clarity.
But now my understanding though, and what I've read about BrewTan B, again, I've never used it, is that it can have an impact on clarity. Is that what?
Absolutely. And so let's paraphrase Ajinomoto's website here a bit, but their marketing content is basically along the lines of that BrewTan B reacts with, like we said from that study, proline-rich haze proteins by pulling them towards that agent and precipitating out of the solution.
I mean, no, it sounds like a fining agent to me, based on that description, I guess. I mean, that sounds...
Yeah, you could, and that's the thing, is like, you can consider it a fining agent. I wouldn't, because when we talk about it, like people like to think of it as clarity agents.
Right.
But BrewTan B can improve clarity simply by the fact that it's helping remove other things from the solution.
So it sounds to me then, if I'm tracking you properly here, it sounds to me like the way I'm dumbing this down so that I understand it. Just tell me if I'm wrong about this. The way BrewTan B works, you've got two main things that it does. The primary one is that it reduces the risk of the finished beer oxidizing, so extending the shelf life, and it does that again. I'm based on what we've talked about, by removing compounds that do oxidize to form those off flavors that we are trying to avoid. So it takes those out of the equation, essentially.
Nailed it.
That's fascinating to me. So okay, tell us then. You said that you can use it in the mash and the boil, which is interesting because like there's not very many things that we do on the mash side to reduce something that is a cold side issue. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And so your malt has trace metals in it. And it also, of course, has some of these other agents that are contributed that can cause oxidation. But that said, malt also has wonderful antioxidant properties all on its own. And so that it contributes that as well. But when you add BrewTan B to the mash, you are helping. It's going to break down some of that content more. It's going to like be left behind in the spent grains, and it's all going to settle in there, and it's going to be able to do that just to help create to help those things settle out of solution more, and reduce the vector for oxidation later on.
This sounds almost like a magical. I mean, if it works the way that it's sold as working, it sounds just. I don't know. I hate to use the word magical, but that it feels almost kind of unreal because.
Well, yeah. Speaking of magical, you mentioned the two, right? That there's flavor stability, there's clarity. There's one more reason that people like Ajinomoto promotes BrewTan B, and that is the the improvement of lautering performance and really and it's kind of makes sense, right? Like as you settle things out of solution, and as you like have a more compact bed of proteins and settled trace metals and all that, you have more liquor. You have more actual wort.
Yeah.
But they promote. So this is the magical part. They promote that it can improve your extract, so your gravity extract and your volume yield by up to 30%.
What? That's crazy.
Yeah, that is wild. Like 30% is a huge amount.
That's huge.
And if it were true every single time, I can't imagine every brewery in the world wouldn't be using it.
No joke.
God. Because that is some money.
Yeah, that's money in the bag. I mean, that's...
I know, exactly. So I'm more skeptical of that number, but they do give themselves an out. They say buy up to. So totally fair. Yeah. It could be anywhere from 0 to 30.
Yeah.
So that's totally fine with me. And obviously, this is something that Jake has actually experienced. I can't really say that I have, and there's some conflicting information, anecdotally speaking.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, like it does seem somewhat magical. But the use of gallic acid is established. It's definitely something that's possible, that has been practiced and well researched by different avenues.
So when we talk about when we're talking about reducing, I guess methods employed during the mash, it's hard for me not to think about I'm going to call it a kind of a movement, but there's a big group of people out there who are absolutely convinced that if you reduce oxygen ingress even up, in the mash, so not stirring your mash. And the low dissolved oxygen or Lodo folks, it seems to me like this would be a product that they'd be all over, if indeed it is reducing or I guess precipitating out the compounds that would otherwise oxidize or during the mash.
Yeah, no, definitely. So there's I think there's a couple camps when we talk about like the low oxygen folk, and the low dissolved oxygen folk who published the Hellas paper back in, I don't actually remember when that was. I think it was like 2015.
I think it was 2015. Yeah.
I'm actually not positive, so hopefully one of them can correct me. But basically, if you visit the German brewing forums, which there's a lot of great resources and information there for those of you that are interested, but there is, I think the terminology they use is the trifecta, which is the sodium metabisulfite, and that is used in their practices to effectively act as like an oxygen buffer, because you have to pre-boil the water in their methodology, and that would ultimately reduce your parts per billion or parts per million to 0. Parts per billion, I'm sure you get a little bit just from like the chilling aspect of it.
Yeah.
But that you use sodium metabisulfite as a buffer. They have ascorbic acid, and I think that's to use a little less sodium metabisulfite so that doesn't come through as much. Like it's a huge salt content.
Right.
And then BrewTan B, and BrewTan B is used primarily as a chelating agent. So, and again, like talking to that community specifically, I think there's like some give and take on like, do you use BrewTan B or do you not? And I think the people who say you don't have maybe experienced either some off flavors. I know that I know some of them have experienced off flavors, but again, like I don't know in what capacity that is.
Yeah.
But I think they primarily talk about BrewTan B because it is an effective chelating agent, which is it's able to react with metals, like we've sort of alluded to form a more stable compound, and then that settles out of the solution. And the low oxygen folk really advocate for not using copper, right? Because copper, like a copper chiller, is going to contribute copper to the wort, and then you are going to have like Fenton reactions, which is just the oxygen reaction with metal later on, and that's going to cause oxidation. And so BrewTan B, being a chelating agent with metals, is able to help, especially like iron, is able to help settle those trace minerals out of the solution and reduce that vector for oxidation. So I think that's where you see it with them. I think that it is, and I think they're definitely like half of the proponents for why BrewTan B is being discussed more. And it's a really interesting, it's definitely an interesting dynamic, but I don't know that they're 100% sold on BrewTan B. I don't think it's magic that's
what I was going to say. It's not, so it sounds to me, because in my mind, I'm looking at this kind of too good to be true concept that you can reduce oxidation in the mash. Seems to me like that'd go right up their alley, but maybe through their own experience. I know they do a lot of kind of personal experimentation and whatnot. It just maybe hasn't been as wonderful as presumed. So, so you can use it in the mash, and then you can also use it in the boil. Is there something different about what would happen in the mash as opposed to using it in the boil? Do you use it both or in both?
So that's an excellent point too. Like basically, the rule of thumb I've heard is that like they do act differently during those stages and like during the boiling, especially if you're going to use other fining agents. Like if you are going to use Werflock, you can't add BrewTan B and Werflock together. They need to be added at least like a minute apart at separate times. And that is just like, it's going to helps. It's just to settle those solutions or get those things settled and have it do the work that it's going to do individually, not like in the context of another agent, right? Because that can interfere with how it does its job. But really, like the idea behind doing it in the mash is to get rid of those trace metals that are already in the grain, so they're not going through like the boil process. And obviously, if you can improve lauter performance, that's huge because that's where that's going to take place.
That's awesome.
But then in the boil, it is still a little bit of that trying to reduce the trace metals, but also now that you've added hops, now that you've contributed more to the beer now, that again needs to be settled out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it's like, we've talked about like filters where there's like 2-stage filters that you do a big filter and a small filter. This is just to do, okay, you've added more stuff, so let's get a lot of stuff out in the beginning. Okay, now you've added stuff, and now let's get that out. Right. Instead of saying, oh, let's remove it all at once.
Yeah. That sounds interesting to me. Is there one of the things that I wonder before we talk about how to use BrewTan B is whether or not you said that some people may have experienced like off flavors from it and whatnot. So if you can you use too much of it basically? Like if you go mash to boil?
Yeah, no, there definitely can be. I would say that, using too much, I don't necessarily have like a number for it because the recommendations for dosage are also kind of all over the board, and sometimes more exact than others. But that said, like you are throwing tannins into your wort, and you're throwing it into the beer ultimately. So I would definitely be hesitant about it. And the fact that there are anecdotal reports of people who I know to be very good brewers and people who are very smart, that evidence of it possibly contributing an off flavor is definitely something to watch out for and be concerned about.
Well, it makes sense to me. But now I guess maybe what we should talk about is maybe first up is where people can get BrewTan B. I know that for a while it was really difficult, almost impossible to find in the United States, and that people were like getting it shipped over from Australia or something like that.
Yeah, you could get it from Australia, and like that was just like people shipping it, I think as like favors to their friends.
Yeah,
like they would kind of do the same thing. But BrewTan B is definitely more available now, which is great because like obviously it's interesting because like Joe Formanak, who's one of the guys who works for Ajinomoto, he actually is I don't know if he's currently the president, but he was the president of the Urban Knaves of Graham Homebrew Club here.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I think he was on the Experimental Brewing podcast about BrewTan B as well, which was great because he's incredibly smart and a really nice guy.
Definitely.
And so like I'm glad we can get it here in the States now. And if you're looking for it, if you want to try this out, it is definitely available from like Williams Brewing has it. I know Great Fermentations has it. There's definitely some online shops that are carrying it now, and it's I think it's about $6 or $7 an ounce, which I know seems like a lot, but you really are only using like a gram ish or a little less in each of your brews, and it a little bit goes a long way in that regard. So
$6 or $7 for like 20 plus batches of beer, essentially.
Something like that, yeah.
So how much, kind of walk us through how you use this stuff. I'd like to know, again, I've never done it. It sounds like a good thing that I may be picking up soon. Walk us through a little bit how you would use it in the mash and then how you might use it in the boil. You're not using it anywhere after that, right?
No. It's just the mash and boil, and then I know some people are doing it just the mash, some people are doing it just the boil, and it's all over the board, and it's worth kind of narrowing in for your system and trying it. I am like a proponent of I don't think you necessarily want to add things to your beer that you don't need to.
Yeah.
So if I would definitely like just consider dialing it in. But in terms of dosage, the recommendations are all over the board, and it's a tough thing to really pin down because like I know Wyeast has a page on BrewTan B on their website, and they actually recommend a dosage of like 0.25 grams per gallon of water. And like 0.16 grams per gallon of wort. And so that's one interesting thing. When you measure dosage rates, it's always per gallon of liquid, not it's not like your finished beer or your volume. It's always based on the water, like the volume.
Okay.
So, this is quite a bit higher than the manufacturer recommendations. And in the manufacturer recommendations, they actually offer up a range of like 0.045 grams to 0.12 grams per gallon of liquor in both the mash tun and the boil. Okay. So that's fairly low. I've really been using about 0.08 grams per gallon, which is right in the middle of it's right in the middle of that range, right? It's not a lot. And it's definitely been an experience that has been positive so far for me. So 0.08 grams per gallon is right in the middle. You can go a little higher, go a little lower, totally up to you. But base that number on what volume is currently in the vessel as opposed to what your finished volumes are projected to be.
Okay, that's good. That's a good tip. That was my question. So you're doing it based on your starting liquor, basically.
Yeah, well, you're doing it based on, for the mash, you're doing it based on the starting liquor, and then for the boil, whatever your post-mash volume is supposed to be.
Right, so your pre-boil volume, same difference there.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, okay, and now are you like pre-dissolving? Because I know it comes in powder form, right?
It does. It comes in a powdered form, and that's part of its production, is just, it's it has all of that removed. It's dehydrated. You do have to dissolve it, and you just do that in like obviously like a fourth cup or a half cup of water. I have done for the pre-boil edition. I've done it just dissolving it in some wort beforehand.
Sure.
And the experiences have been fine. I don't know if that's kosher or not. I'm sure someone will correct me if it's not. I hope they do. But I've been doing that, and I haven't had any problems with it. But you do have to dissolve it prior to adding it to the vessel.
Okay, but that's funny to me because I hear that with other stuff as well, that you have to dissolve certain things in something that when it's just going to get dissolved in the liquid anyways. But whatever, I get it. We do follow the rules.
Well, that'll be our follow-up experiment to this is just whether or not we rehydrate it.
There you go.
That'd be fine.
So you and Jake have been using BrewTan B for the last year or so.
Yes, we have. And something I kind of forgot to mention, the timing thing. Adding BrewTan B to the mash, add it just prior to mashing in, and adding it to the boil. This is kind of all over the board too. The manufacturer recommendation is 5 minutes before the end of the boil. I've seen recommendations up to like 16 minutes,
okay.
which is quite a bit more. And then like obviously a minute between doing that and then doing any other fining agent.
Right.
And that's more time for it to do its job.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So back, but like you mentioned, I've been using this for a while now. I think about like 2 years ago, I won a raffle at Drunk Monk, and I got a pound of it, which is a huge amount of BrewTan B. Like I still have tons left, and it's all vacuum sealed individually into small packages. It's something like 200 batches of BrewTan B worth that I got. So I sent some off to some friends. I decided to give it a shot in this experiment, and then I kind of just tried to continue using it in my day-to-day brewing just to get a feel for it and see if I felt it did anything. And in my anecdotal experience, I'm getting clearer wort into the fermenter than I think I am without it. I honestly can't speak to the impact it's potentially had on shelf life. I move beer so quickly.
Yeah.
It's, since this experiment, I haven't really done an intentional side-by-side aging of BrewTan B versus no BrewTan B or, no gallic acid.
Yeah.
I really want to do it again, especially because, as we'll talk about, like my experiences with BrewTan B lately and in the past don't necessarily line up with what I went through in the experiment. But we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But I did reach out to Jake because Jake has also been using it a bit, and I wanted to quickly read this blurb from him. And so Jake says, I've been using BrewTan B for about 2 years now. When I started using it, I noticed a few things immediately. I was getting higher yield, more clear wort into the boil kettle, and leading to less loss to trub after the boil. BrewTan B seemed to turn the foam on my mash and boil pink, which was wild at first. That's something I've experienced. This is we'll jump back to me really quick. Because that's what it's about. But I've experienced that as well. Like a tinted, I guess, settling of that material, a pink trub, which is really strange.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Now, like Jake, I've never had that carry over into the finished product in any way. Like I'm not turning out pink beers, but it's definitely weird that has happened.
I wonder what that one of the things that Jake and I think it was Jake was just kind of spitballing at one point about what that could possibly be, and in the manufacturing process of BrewTan B, isn't it? Now maybe I'm thinking of something else, but aren't they basically collecting like something from the wine process or something, or?
So for BrewTan B, I believe it's oak. I believe it's an oak tannin that's being collected.
Okay, but are they getting it from the inside of barrels? I mean, or are they just making it? Do they have a manufacturing process for it? I honestly don't know how it's made.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's an excellent question.
Yeah. Well, anyways, it does turn the foam during the boil pinkish. It's undeniably pinkish colored. It's very interesting. Glad that it doesn't carry over in the finished beer. That'd be very weird to have a non-fruited beer with a pink foam. But it does sound like both you and Jake are having, at least on an anecdotal level, some positive results. You, of course, put it to the test. We are going to be digging into those results as soon as we're back from this short break. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BrewPod. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. Carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear, Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew in a bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
As we discussed earlier, BrewTan B is one of those products that can apparently be used at various points in the brewing process. Matt, you performed an experiment comparing a batch made with BrewTan B and one made without. Tell us how you designed this one.
I did. So I ended up making a pale ale. It was about 1048 OG, 36 IBUs. And the reason I ended up doing like a hoppy beer for this style was I wanted to increase the amount of potential oxidation. I wanted to increase I wanted to add more to the wort, and if I'd done something like a Scottish ale or something that I would typically brew, like a blonde ale, there's definitely that potential of what it's going to contribute in the mash, and like what the malt is going to contribute. I think that's definitely valid, but I wanted to add on to it a bit. I wanted to tack on some more, so we went with a pale ale. And I also kind of paired this as a THC batch, which is our Hop Chronicles series, and I did Caliente hops, and did Caliente at 60 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes, and a dry hop. And this was all just part of the THC procedure, but two, this was a good variable to pair it with because it was a way for me to introduce more to go wrong, basically. Like more ways to try to make it worse.
Right. Well, and hoppy beers tend to be more, we could argue that oxygen is going to have a fairly static impact, consistent impact on beer in general, but hoppier beers, that impact seems to be more perceptible and more noticeable. You get less hop character, purportedly due to oxidation. And so the idea with using a hoppier style like an American Pale Ale was basically to increase that potential, right? I mean, and what we wanted to see was how BrewTan B, when added, did you add it to both the mash and the boil?
I did. So for this one, I ended up following pretty much the exact manufacturer's recommendations. Now, I think there was some pushback after we released the article, like, oh, you should have added this at 16 minutes, or oh, you should have used more or used less. And that is, I think, all valid, like maybe for sure. I'm okay with that. But this is what the people who make the product recommended at the time of us doing it. And what that was ultimately about a gram between the mash and the boil. So I used that 0.08 number because it's right in the middle of their recommendation range, dissolving it in a 4th cup of water prior to it, and then adding that about half of that BrewTan B, I think it's like 0.56 grams, to the mash prior to mashing in, and then adding the rest of it about 5 minutes before the end of the boil. So I didn't use any other fining agents for this beer, no gelatin, nothing like that, just because I wanted to see what the BrewTan B was going to do on its own.
Now, just to get it out of the way, the grist was very simple. It was 96% pale malt, 4% light Munich malt. Now, you did both of these, you did 2 separate mashes side by side. They were both, correct me if I'm wrong, they were both full volume, no sparge batches, right?
Yep, every time that's what I end up going with. And post boil, after that went through, we saw a very, very there was no yield difference. Like, I didn't end up with more liquor in the boil kettle than with the BrewTan beer than the non-BrewTan beer.
Which that could be a function of the mash method that you used. I mean,
exactly. Very much so.
Yeah, I mean, you're using those unibrow systems, so there's no real bag, but it's basically a brew in a bag system. You're removing the grain from the wort as opposed to lautering the wort away from the grain. It could be that the BrewTan B would have a more noticeable impact if you were using a more traditional, like three system or 3 vessel setup.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I agree 100%. And despite, so even with no yield difference, we did see a really, really slight difference in gravity. It was like 0.001 difference, which is ultimately almost not a difference.
Yeah.
It could be anything. I'm not going to attribute to that to the BrewTan B.
I would struggle to say that was because of the BrewTan
Exactly.
B, but it was. The BrewTan B batch is the one that came back 1 point higher. Oh boy. So who knows? Maybe that is.
So
maybe
that
it did
efficiency
contribute.
impact confirmed by Brewlosophy.
Exactly.
So the weird thing about these beers, after it was done, we chilled them, I put them into clear fermenters this time because I wanted to see if there was going to be a clarity difference kind of over time. I wanted to see like if it was going to end up being less hazy, and these beers were hazy the entire time. They were never clear. They never cleared up. It is still baffling to me. It was at the time for sure, but it still is something that bothers me.
Did you ferment it with like a powdery yeast? What yeast did you use to ferment it with?
So ultimately, I didn't use a powdery yeast. I ended up using, when they were still producing the cans, Imperial Yeast's flagship.
AO7,
which is Chico.
Which is not known for being too powdery. It you can clear up a beer, but it's also not known for being highly flocculent. I just wonder to what extent yeast choice may have contributed to that haze, because I would have expected the beers to clear up at some point, but they really didn't. I mean, if you go look at the photos.
Yeah, I mean the BrewTan B beer, it definitely was slightly clearer. It did for sure. It looked slightly clearer, but they both were nowhere near bright. Like I was not super comfortable with how cloudy they were.
Any differences in attenuation or anything like that between the BrewTan B beer and the normal?
A little bit. So I mean, like we said, the BrewTan B beer ended up being 0.001 gravity points higher, and both of these beers actually settled to the same final gravity of 0.013.
Okay.
So slightly more attenuation, but because they ended up the same. But again, almost nothing.
Now, one of the interesting things, and I suppose this was expected because of the BrewTan B, was the picture that I'm looking at now at kegging when you put the carboys next to each other. There was a difference. A slight difference in what, at least observable to me, in the amount of trub at the bottom of each fermenter.
Yes, so there was definitely noticeable more trub in the non-BrewTan B batch, which potentially that is from it settling out prior to being racked over to the vessel,
which is what it's supposed to do. I mean, right? That's
that's exactly what it's supposed to do, and so that there's definitely potential for that. I'm a little hesitant again. Like, I'm not totally sure how much to attribute to the BrewTan B or not, but that was a definite difference that I saw between those beers.
And that difference is, if we are looking, maybe the yield, the pre-boil yield was no different, but the fact, I mean, one could argue that if that was attributable to BrewTan B, one could argue that that's a benefit of using this stuff in the small amount, that relatively small amount that you do, is that you are going to get potentially higher finished beer yield.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Definitely something worth exploring more. So after these beers were racked, then they were racked just into CO2 purged kegs, but I racked in through the open. So there's definitely like a vector for oxygen to play a role in these beers.
Yeah.
Which I would hope that with that introduction that I would be able to say like, oh, well, the one with BrewTan B ended up handling that introduction of oxygen better because there was like less there for it to react with. That's total speculation on my part, but that's kind of the hope.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that.
So after that week in kind of a cool environment, they were burst carbonated. I gave them some time, and they both maintained a pretty noticeable haze. And that was just kind of the case. They both never cleared up, like we mentioned before. And then we had our first round of data collection with the Pale Homebrew Club here in Illinois, and they're fantastic. They actually were the group who did data collection for both of these beers, which I thought was fun, for both the experiments.
No, yeah, I think it's awesome. And just we did do 2 sets of data collection. I remember this first one that you did, the first set was to see if there was an impact on what we would refer to as more of a fresh beer. So it was two weeks after you kegged, where you went out and you collected data at a Pale Homebrew Club meeting. 27 participants, out of which 14 would have been expected to get it right in order for us to say it was significant.
And exactly 14 did. So that would hit right on the line there. And so we can say that, participants in this sample were reliably able to tell these beers apart. And of the people who made the accurate selection, only a total of 4 preferred liking the, standard beer, which is the beer without BrewTan. 3 liked the beer with BrewTan more. 5 reported having no preference, and 2 perceived no difference between the beers. So that's always the fun option. But ultimately it was fairly split. I wouldn't say that there was there's definitely not a clear preference for either of these, despite the fact that people were able to tell these beers apart when they were fresh.
So when these results came in, I'll be honest, I didn't expect it to be significant. As magical as it sounded, my brain was just too skeptical to accept that it could really have an impact. The fact that 14 out of 27 people were able to identify the odd beer out on the fresh version of the beers was shocking to me. I'll be honest with you. I thought it was going to be far less than that, maybe a third or so. And it did suggest, hey, maybe there is some impact this chemical has on whatever it does, whether that's oxidation or whatever. The preference data is kind of interesting and all of that, but still, the fact that it did come back significant was interesting to me. Probably. Well, how did you perform on your triangle test, Matt?
Terribly. No, I did not. I was not able to reliably tell these beers apart. They were really, really ultimately, looking back at both of them, I kind of perceived them just as generally having a pretty muted malt character, definitely some good citrus notes from the hops, which I enjoyed. But I just could not distinguish the odd beer out at all. I did really terribly. And it's interesting because we're looking back at this experiment, it kind of feels like, this should have been the point at which they weren't significant, because in theory, these beers weren't that old. Shelf stability shouldn't have had too much of an impact, except for potentially the vectors for oxidation that I introduced later on in the process by racking into an open keg and doing all that stuff. I'm really interested to redo this, especially based on the anecdote from both Jake and I, in a really sealed and closed environment. Yeah. So maybe if Jake's listening, he can tackle that with the unit tanks.
Yeah, definitely. Well, probably the most common comment that we got after doing the first experiment was, well, you got to let them age. We want to see what, how it's a shelf stability product. Let's see how, it impacts shelf stability. So you let these beers sit around for a little while and then recollected a new set of data.
A little while, to say the least. I had a spare mini fridge at the time, which was incredibly convenient. So I let these beers sit in this mini fridge for 6 months. Just put back in there and stored them away and hid them away.
Nothing like a 6-month-old hoppy beer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was just, I'll admit, I wasn't super looking forward to it. Yeah. I brought some other beers and ciders to the Pale Club as an apology afterwards. So that was great. Either way, what startled me the most, more than even the results of this experiment, but after those 6 months, again, the BrewTan beer was slightly clearer. Both of these beers, despite being in cold storage for 6 months, were so hazy.
I know. It's so weird.
I don't know it honestly, looking at it, and the fun part about was it really cold and aged for 6 months? You can see snow in the first photo of me with these beers, and then you look at the second photo and it's clearly summer. Yeah. So it's fun to kind of track that, looking at my old place. But so these beers had not dropped bright at all, and that is just very contrary to a lot of my experience.
Yeah.
A lot of my experience.
I know.
Especially with that much time. So I'm still blown away by that, again, just like I was with the original experiment. But 6 months. 6 months of waiting time.
So after those 6 months, before we talk about that second set of data that you collected at the Pale Homebrew Club meeting, what did you? My expectation is that difference that people noticed when the beer was fresh is that delta is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. What were the beers, in your opinion? Did they change? And were you able to tell a difference at this point, unlike last time?
No. So similar to the first round, I really couldn't distinguish these beers at all. If anything, I thought that they were converging. I perceived them as being identical, and I honestly could not. I thought they both tasted stale. I thought they both tasted too old for a hoppy beer, for sure. So I didn't love that. But for me, it was hard to get away from it didn't have that papery character. It wasn't a more intense oxidative character, character, but it definitely was very muted. Definitely a little sweet now. Like a little bit of that oxidation has started to creep in. So for me, these beers were damn near identical at this point.
What about the this new set of participants that you collected?
So we had the Pale Homebrew Club come back. They tried again, and then a total of 21 people this time participated in the experiment. And at that sample size, we would have needed 12 people to select the unique sample in order to reach significance. And in this time around, only 8 people were correct. So indicating that these beers, after 6 months of aging, were not reliably, or at least there wasn't enough of a change that they were reliably distinguishable from one another with that sample.
Well, one could contend, kind of like you said, that the beers actually started to converge. They got more similar, which would sort of make sense when I'm considering the impact of oxygen if the product wasn't really working, I guess. But who knows? It could also be, and this is always, it could be that the first set of data was just a false positive. That can happen, though. 14 out of 27 that's pretty, I mean, that's some crazy guessing. The chances of that being false positive, but it could be. I mean,
I definitely, and something else I think like we like to talk about internally is like the idea of like the context of truth, which that could definitely, I think that could be not even a false positive, but true when I was racking into like that open container.
Right.
And there was all these vectors for oxidation. If it were closed, maybe this would be different.
Yeah.
Totally could be.
Yeah, totally. Well, you're still using, in the end, you're still using BrewTan B fairly regularly. Is that because you just have so much lying around, or do you still think that it's actually having an impact on the beers that you're making?
That's an excellent question. It's actually, now I'm not sure. It might be because I have so much of it that I'm like continuing to be like, oh, well, I'll just use some of this BrewTan B.
Right.
But so to be honest, like being a no sparge, brew in a bag brewer, right? Even though the Unibrow has a basket, effectively, it's not really a bag.
Right.
But as far as like being a brew in a basket brewer, I've noticed my beers being slightly hazier than when I was a 2-vessel system, and I think we just typically don't give the grain bed enough credit for its performance as a filter.
Yeah.
Now that said, like I've been using some BrewTan B and I've changed my practices a bit, and actually transitioning from the basket to this closed side basket that the new system uses, I've definitely noticed clearer wort. And because it's forcing it through that grain bed now, as opposed to escaping like the path of least resistance through the sides of a basket or bag.
Yeah.
This is all speculation.
Yeah.
This is not rooted in anything scientific.
Right, yeah.
This is all speculation. But so I've continued to use it. I've noticed really clear wort, which is fantastic. I'm really happy about that. But kind of like I said earlier, even though I've been using BrewTan B, and again, I think now that you've said it, like it might just be because I have so much and because I've noticed the clearer wort.
Yeah.
I don't store beer long enough for this to be a problem.
Yeah.
Like my shelf stability is never an issue. My cold side practices are fairly tight. And I do a lot of spunding and all that stuff. Like, so it's, I'm not too worried about that. Also because it's just, I move it so quick.
Yeah. Well, I've never used BrewTan B. I'm still interested. I don't think, just because we've got these, I'm going to call this 1.5 experiments because it's, two sets of data on the same beer, but separated by time. I don't think that this is makes any conclusive facts about BrewTan beers. But I'm very much into reducing cold side oxidation. I really do believe that regardless of the style, that's an important factor in beer quality. And so if this is inexpensive enough, it still interests me, and for that I'll probably pick some up next time I make a purchase from Great Fermentations or wherever, and just put it to use. I don't think it's going to hurt anything. I do look forward to you guys doing more experiments on those on BrewTan B and the impact as compared to not using it, because I think there's still a ton to learn. All right, we've got some reader comments we're going to get through here. Now, these come from both of the articles, from the experiment article, so I'll try to parse that out. Will Allwart, on the first article, he put, it would be interesting to test this product on a New England IPA. Although clarity is not necessarily a desired effect, oxidation seems to play a large impact on these beers. Maybe an experiment aging a New England IPA for a few months before testing. See if the dosed batch stays bright or starts to turn that purple brown they are known to get.
Oh, I hate that purple brown.
It's so gross, man.
I have like this visceral reaction to that when we see like photos of it. Yeah. So I 100% agree with you. I definitely think that, like, especially as we explore styles that seem to be more susceptible to the impact of oxygen, primarily just because of what the hops bring to the table in terms of these beers and like the flaked oats. I think, and Scott, I think we've talked about before, Scott Janish has some incredible work on New England IPAs and the impact of oxygen in that. And you can read about that in his new book, which we can continue plugging because it's fantastic.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but I'm going to. Scott's just a rad dude.
It's sitting on my table, and I've thumbed through it a bit. I'm looking forward to like really getting nerdy about it, so it's going to be tons of fun. But I 100% agree with you. I think that would be an excellent style to continue trying this with. We might have to send some BrewTan B to Brian to get him to do it, because I don't think any of the rest of us are brewing New England IPAs really. But we can definitely give that a shot. I 100% agree. I think it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, me too. I don't think there's another style more apt to being tested on with BrewTan B than New England IPA. At least
not one we've talked about. I would also like to see it. I've considered, do we do this with like a barley wine, or do we do this with like an imperial stout, something that you are actually looking for some of those micro oxidative characters over time. I think that might also be a cool one, is like, how does that impact it after you age it for that period of time?
I agree.
But I think a New England would be, I think it's low hanging fruit. I think that's the easy one.
Yeah. On the second article, the one where you returned and got data on the aged version, Dan Marshall says, on the clarity question, your description of the brew process says, since BrewTan B is said to improve beer clarity, I left out my usual addition of Whirlfloc during the 60-minute boil. It would seem as though another conclusion of this experiment would be that at mid-range dose of BrewTan, it does not appreciably improve clarity.
So this BrewTan was added 5 minutes before the end of the boil, which is the manufacturer's recommendation of BrewTan B. So it wasn't necessarily too mid-range, and both of the beers were really cloudy. So I would say maybe. I mean, in this instance, yes. In this experiment, it did not lead to a reliably distinguishable impact. Like, we can't really measure clarity in that way. I guess we could, but we don't.
Yeah.
Like, we serve all these in opaque cups. But like you've seen in the pictures, like, there is a very slight difference to the clarity, and the BrewTan B is slightly clearer, but not enough to say like you should start using this for its clarity purposes.
It seems like there are much better options if your goal is clarity.
Absolutely, 100%. Both on the cold side and the hot side, beyond a shadow of a doubt. So I mean, that's a fair conclusion from this experiment, but as always, just one experiment. And it's, there's anecdotal evidence to con it, but that's fair observation.
Yeah, nope, I agree. All right, our final comment's kind of a long one. It comes from our good friend Kid Moxie. Hi, Derek. And he had some points. He had been using BrewTan B since December of 2017. He got some, and he at this point he had 4 batches under his belt. I like what he shared. He has some observations, so I'm going to go through these point by point, and we'll comment on each one. The first one, he says, my brew house efficiency has consistently been 2 to 3% higher than what my standard was prior to using BrewTan B, though he also calibrated his refractometer in the same time period, which may have accounted for the higher brew house efficiency. But
let's just ditch that comment.
Well, he said it. I don't want to ignore Derek.
He changed his method of measurement during that process.
Okay, we're not going to
Derek,
comment.
I believe you and love you very much.
Yes, we all do. All right, we'll just move on to the second comment. He says 2 of the beers were exceptionally clear. He made a Bock and a Mexican lager. One beer, Winter Warmer, had a haze that took a while to go away, even with gelatin. And the one that he had fermenting at the time of this comment, his fourth one, using BrewTan B, he says he's not sure what's up with the Winter Warmer because he used Terminato sugar in it. Maybe that somehow reacted with the BrewTan B and to make it hazier. I think he was commenting on the fact that your beers just never cleared up even with the BrewTan B.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And it's actually really interesting to think about how BrewTan B reacts with other haze-forming compounds. Because, like, obviously it's not going to get everything, right? And especially like gallic acid, which that's what BrewTan B is. But like gallic acid has actually been known, thankfully, to not remove like foam stability proteins, which is really nice for us on our end.
Yeah.
But it makes you think, like, what isn't it reacting with, and what isn't it capable of pulling out? Do you need to use, or not need, but should you use BrewTan B and Whirlfloc if you really, really want like to use findings to get clear beer? Potentially. I think that's totally fair. And it sounds like Derek's experience was a fantastic anecdote of that you can definitely get really clear beer using BrewTan B, that my experience in this experiment of having a really hazy beer wasn't necessarily the same. So
yeah,
awesome.
and I mean something else clearly is at play, and I think he says that the next point he makes, he says the Bock is about 2.5 months old and still tasting really excellent and fresh. That's fantastic. He says I have no way of verifying it's any different if I hadn't used BrewTan B, but it's at least anecdotally tasting good.
Hey man, I mean I know Derek makes great beer,
he
so
does.
That's fantastic. I love a good box, so send some. But that's kind of the trouble with my past experiences with BrewTan B as well, and I think also Jake's. Like we haven't really done any more side by sides of it.
Yeah.
So that just makes it hard to measure beyond the anecdote, which I think the anecdote still has value, especially like what Derek is saying here. So I would love to try it again. I would love if Derek would be willing to try it out and like let us know about his experience. Because it's just something that it's been kind of hit or miss.
Yeah. Well, he left a couple of final notes on this comment. First one, he says, the stuff is pretty simple to use and not expensive. I can see myself using it in all of my batches in the future. This was left over a year ago, so I am curious to know if he's still using BrewTan B in all of his batches. He did say that he uses a Whirlfloc and gelatin as well for all of his batches, and that adding the BrewTan B in the boil, he does it but right before he adds the Whirlfloc, and apparently to him, the wort seems hazier during the lauter, boil, and knockout, but it all settles out during fermentation. So interesting notes from Derek Springer. Matt, that's all the time we've got for this show. Did you have any final words on BrewTan B before we hit the road?
No, as always, it's a cool product. I'm glad to see that other agents are making their way into just like the common homebrew usage.
Yeah.
I think it's worth exploring. Don't just throw random amounts of tannic acid into your wort. And just do your measurements. It's something that I would say that I've had good experiences with, and I'd love to see more experimentation on.
Absolutely. I look forward to those results as well. Don't forget, you can read both of the experiments that we discussed in this episode over at brewlosophy.com, as well as everything else we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the